They said it was the snow, a whiteout storm sudden and cruel that swallowed my son's family in one afternoon. They said it happens up there. People slip, disappear, never come back. But 3 weeks later, a trail cam deep in the woods caught something. A woman and 2 children moving fast through the brush looking over their shoulders. And that was the moment I stopped listening to what they said and started finding out what really happened. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Eleanor Whitaker. Most folks around the park just call me Ellie. I'm 67 now. Born and raised in Kalispell, Montana. Spent most of my life working up in Glacier, first as a ranger, later training new ones. Those mountains were never just a backdrop to me, they were home. I've seen them gentle in summer and punishing in winter. I know which slopes flood first, which ravines fake their depth, and which trails aren't marked for good reason. When I retired, I stayed close. Started running wilderness retreats for women, survival basics, orienteering first aid. My son Daniel used to tag along when he was little. I taught him to read clouds before he could spell his own name. He used to say he felt safer out in the pines than in a parking lot. Daniel married Rachel about 10 years back. She was kind, level-headed. I liked her. They had twin girls, Ivy and Wren, who looked just like him. Brown curls, big grins, always barefoot in the grass. They'd come visit when the wildflowers came in. We'd roast marshmallows on the back deck and tell the kind of stories that start with, "Back when I was on patrol," and end with, "Don't ever do that." The weekend they disappeared wasn't supposed to be anything unusual, just a short family hike, their favorite loop, nothing technical. Daniel called me early that week. "Come with us," he said. "The girls want to hear more of your bear stories." I wanted to, I really did, but I'd already promised to help at a fundraiser that Saturday. A program for underprivileged kids, getting them out into the wilderness. I told him to take pictures. "Next weekend," I said. "Promise." They sent me one, a photo from the lookout they always stopped at. The same boulder, the same background. Just bigger girls now. Rachel had this idea about making a timeline, the kids growing up in the same exact spot each year. That was the last image I got from them. Later that day, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Weather turning, cutting it short. Talk later." I didn't like that. Not the wording. Not how flat it sounded. I tried to call him right back, but it went straight to voicemail. Same with Rachel's phone. I told myself not to panic. Cell reception up there's hit or miss. Happens all the time. But that night when they didn't come back, when the girls didn't run in laughing with frozen fingers and boots full of snow, that's when the silence got loud. I called the sheriff's office first thing the next morning. By afternoon, search teams were out on foot. Helicopters were scanning ridgelines. Volunteers from town showed up with maps and radios and thermoses of coffee. I stood at the trailhead holding their last photo, trying not to think about the storm forecast. And then, a week passed. Then 2. The news vans pulled out. The posters started curling at the corners. By the 3rd week, the search was scaled back. The coordinator tried to be gentle. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, "it's time to consider the possibility of a tragic outcome." But I wasn't ready. I knew my son. He wouldn't have gotten lost. He would have found shelter. He would have done whatever it took to keep those girls alive. So I went back up there myself. I packed my gear, printed fresh posters, and hiked the trail alone, same loop, same landmarks. As I was pinning one near an old marker, a man stepped out from the trees. Camouflage jacket, orange vest, looked like someone who lived more outdoors than in. "Excuse me," he said. "Mind if I take one of those?" That was the moment everything started to change. He said his name was Cal Jennings. Looked like he could have stepped out of an old hunting catalog, gray and the beard boots caked in trail mud. The kind of guy who moves like he already knows where the next 5 steps will take him. When I handed him a flyer, he stared at it a long time. Longer than most folks do. Then he asked when they went missing. 3 weeks ago, I said. He didn't say much after that, just dug around in his vest pocket and pulled out a little device. One of those trail cams hunters use to track deer movement. Said he had cameras strung along a few old game paths deeper into the woods, farther north than most people venture. Something in my chest locked up. I watched his fingers scroll through stills and short clips, his brow drawing tighter the farther he went. Then he stopped, held it out. "Miss Whitaker, I think you should see this." The footage wasn't good. Grainy mist curling between the trees, but it didn't matter. I knew them, knew every line of their faces. Rachel was in front, moving fast but cautious. Ivy just behind her, Wren, close on her heels. They were bundled up, looking thinner than I remembered, but alive. 3 days ago, Cal said, pointing to the timestamp. I didn't know what to say. My knees went weak, but I didn't let them buckle. "Where's my son?" I asked. Cal didn't answer right away. Said the camera was fixed, only showed what passed directly in front of it. Daniel could have been behind them, out of frame, could have taken a different path, could have... I asked him where the footage was taken. He pulled up a GPS map and pointed to a section of the park about 8 miles north outside the main search grid. No maintained trails. Too dangerous, the authorities had said. High avalanche risk after the last storm. Nobody thought to look there, but someone should have. He offered to send the footage to my phone, gave me his number, told me to call if I needed anything. He seemed genuine, said he'd respected my work over the years. That meant something. Not everything, but something. I thanked him, then made my way back to the lodge as fast as I could manage. By the time I got to my cabin, my hands were trembling too hard to hold the phone steady. Still, I managed to call the lead detective, Marshall. I told him what I'd found, or rather what Cal had shown me. Told him I was sending the footage now, that it proved they were alive, that we needed to restart the search, right away. He didn't argue the footage, admitted it looked like Rachel and the girls, but he wouldn't authorize a nighttime search. The terrain, he said, was too unstable, conditions too unpredictable. Any rescue attempt now would only create more victims. I knew he was right. I didn't like it. But I'd spent too many years in that very role to argue. Still, something about it left me cold. When I asked about helicopters, he shut that down too. Weather wouldn't permit it, and besides, the video didn't show signs of immediate distress. They were walking, not stumbling, not calling for help. He said they'd organized teams at first light and that I could join the effort given my experience. I agreed. Not because I trusted the process at that point, I didn't, but because I needed to be part of it. After the call, I sat there in silence for a long while, just staring at the still frame on my screen. Rachel's face half turned. Ivy's coat too thin for the cold. Wren's posture cautious, like she was listening for something behind her. My family had been 30 miles away all this time. Alive. And nobody had found them. I kept coming back to one question. Why were they that far north? Daniel would have never led his family into uncharted ground without a good reason. He knew those slopes, knew the avalanche reports, knew better. Something else was going on, but there was no way to find out tonight. That thought settled like ice in my chest. I tried to eat something. Couldn't. The walls of that little cabin felt too close, too quiet. So I went to the main lodge for dinner, figured being around people might quiet my thoughts. It didn't. The place was warm, noisy, full of skiers and hikers laughing over drinks. I sat at the edge with a cup of instant noodles listening to the fire pop. 2 men nearby were talking just low enough that they thought I couldn't hear. "That's Ellie Whitaker, isn't it? The one who donated all that money last month?" "Yeah. Shame about her family. But if it were mine, I'd be up there right now. Storm be damned." The other one replied, not unkindly. "She's just a woman. Doing this alone. Can't be easy at her age. I didn't say anything, just stared into my cup. Let their voices fade. They weren't wrong. But they didn't know me. Daniel wouldn't have waited. Not if it were me out there. He would have gone. I finished just enough of the meal to quiet the gnaw in my stomach. Then I left. No one noticed. Back in the cabin, I moved on instinct. Packed my gear, layered thermal under waterproof. Checked the GPS and spare batteries. Marked the coordinates Cal had shown me. Made sure my old SAR pack was stocked first aid emergency blanket extra food. I didn't second guess it. There wasn't time for that. When I stepped out, snow was already falling again. Thick, heavy flakes. I avoided the lit trails. Moved quietly. Headlamp off until I cleared the buildings. When I reached the trailhead, I paused. Looked toward the dark stretch of forest I'd be entering. Then I switched on the light. Took my first step in. The snow was deep, the path barely visible. Each breath came out as mist, but I kept going. By the time I'd been hiking 2 hours, I was soaked to the knees and the wind had started to bite through my gloves. Visibility was maybe 10 feet, but I knew I was close. Then I saw it, a warm glow through the trees. At first I thought it was a mirage, a trick of exhaustion, but it held. As I got closer, it resolved into a cabin, small, sturdy, tucked between the trees with smoke curling from the chimney. Someone was inside. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again, louder, called out. A long silence. Then the door creaked open, and there she was, Rachel. She stared at me like she'd seen a ghost, then stepped forward and pulled me inside. Ellie. How? What are you doing here? She asked, rushing to help me out of my snow-covered coat. Before I could answer, I heard small voices from the back. Mom. Who is it? 2 tiny faces peeked out from behind a wooden chair. Ivy and Wren. Alive. Pale, but smiling. Grandma Ellie, they shouted. I dropped to my knees without thinking. The warmth from the fire stung my skin, bringing feeling back in painful waves. Rachel handed me a cup of something hot, milk maybe powdered. She told the girls to head back to bed, promised they could talk to me in the morning. They obeyed without fuss. They looked tired, but safe. When they'd settled under their blanket, I turned back to Rachel. Where's Daniel? Her face changed. She sank into a chair across from me, shoulders folding in on themselves. We had an accident, she said quietly. Got caught in that storm 3 weeks ago. I asked why they were in that part of the park. She said Daniel wanted to try something different. Lower slopes. Less traffic, she claimed. Then the storm hit. We just kept going until we found this cabin. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. I looked around at the neatly stacked firewood, the fresh supplies. Something about it didn't sit right. Then I saw it. A glint under a floorboard near the trash bin. I reached for it, lifted the board. A wedding ring. Daniel's. The diamond inlay was unmistakable. And it was clean, too clean. I held it up. This was under the floor. Rachel froze, then reached for it. He must have lost it that first night. His hands were numb. We were all freezing. I let her take it, but I didn't believe her. I scanned the cabin again. Details fell into place like puzzle pieces. Full cabinets, too much firewood, canned food and fresh milk. This place doesn't look abandoned, I said. Rachel hesitated. I think someone uses it. Maybe a hunter. We hide when we hear anyone coming. I didn't get to ask anything else. The pain hit before I saw the movement. A heavy crack across the back of my skull. The last thing I saw was the floor rushing up to meet me. And then darkness. When I came to the world was quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. There was no wind against the cabin walls, no rustling of trees, not even the sound of the girls breathing nearby. just a deep, humming silence that settled in my ears like pressure before a storm. The air was thick chemical. I tried to move, but my arms wouldn't follow. My legs were numb. Rope. My wrists were tied behind the chair ankles, bound to the legs. My mouth was dry, head pounding from where Rachel had struck me. The room was darker than before the fire reduced to low, flickering embers, but that smell, it was unmistakable. Gas. My nose and throat burned from it. I looked toward the windows. Frost lined the glass, but just beyond it the snow had stopped. Clear night. The kind of cold that cracks pine branches and silences animals. I scanned the cabin. No sign of Rachel. No Ivy, no Wren. The bed was empty. The blankets looked thrown back in a hurry. Panic crept up the back of my neck, but I kept my breathing steady. I'd trained others for moments like this. Focus buys time. I tested the ropes. They were tight, but not professional. I could feel the slack, just enough in my left wrist if I angled it right. The chair was old. Strong, but the frame had a bit of give. I shifted my weight, slowly tilting back, then forward, then finally throwing all I had to the left. It toppled hard. I hit the floor with a jolt that sent a sharp pain through my skull again, but I heard the wood creak, again and again, until one of the legs cracked beneath the stress. With that broken piece, I managed to bend just enough to get a hand to my coat pocket. My fingers were slow from the cold, but they found what I was looking for, my folding knife. It took everything I had to open it without cutting myself. I worked the blade back and forth on the rope breath, shallow from the fumes. Every second counted now. Just as I freed my right hand, the fire shifted. A small flash of flame curled toward the kitchen wall where the gas must have been pooling. I could feel the temperature change even from the floor. I sliced the rest of the bindings and crawled to the door. Locked. I turned the knob, pushed nothing. I didn't stop. Grabbed a log from the firewood pile, staggered to the nearest window, and hit the glass with everything I had. Once. Twice. The third time it shattered outward. Shards flew into the snow. I cleared the jagged edges with the log, ignoring the cuts opening along my palms and wrists. I climbed out. My jacket caught on the sill, but I tore free and fell into the drift outside. The cold hit me like a second wind. I rolled once, twice, and pulled myself away just as the fire behind me roared louder. Then came the burst. A muffled, brutal whoosh of pressure and heat. The whole cabin glowed orange and angry against the dark. Everything I had brought with me, my phone GPS maps, it was all inside. All gone. But I was still breathing. I looked to the trees. The snow was clean, undisturbed, no sign of where Rachel might have gone. I took a breath, trying to orient myself, but then I heard it. Faint at first. A voice. High-pitched. Crying. Somewhere in the woods. I pushed toward it, stumbling through the snow, my legs shaking from cold and injury. The voice came again, clearer. A child. I followed the sound past a cluster of trees until I saw a small figure huddled in the snow near a rocky outcropping. Purple jacket. Wren. I called her name and moved closer. She looked up, her face red from tears and cold, one leg twisted awkwardly beneath her. "Grandma Ellie," she whimpered. "It hurts. My leg really hurts." I knelt down beside her hands, shaking as I peeled back the bottom of her snow pants. Her ankle was swollen, turning color already. She couldn't walk on it. That much was clear. "What happened, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to stay calm for her sake. "Where's your mom?" she sniffled, wiping her nose with her glove. "I fell down the hill. Mom said we had to keep going, but then she said she was sorry, and that she and Ivy had to leave me. She said something about sacrifice." I didn't respond right away. I just wrapped my scarf tight around the leg, used a nearby branch to make a quick splint. The word echoed in my head. Sacrifice. Rachel had left her own child in a snowbank alone and injured. I didn't have time to process what that meant yet. I just picked Wren up as carefully as I could and held her close. Her body was trembling. Mine wasn't far behind. "We're going to get out of here," I said. "Hold on tight." I didn't know how long the walk would take. Didn't know how far I'd wandered off trail in the dark. But the stars were out now. I used the North Star to guide us west. Each step felt longer than the last, every muscle aching, but I kept going. Wren drifted in and out of sleep, her head pressed against my shoulder. When she whimpered, I whispered to her, told her stories from when her dad was little, told her we were close, that I wouldn't stop. Eventually, as the sky started to pale at the edges, I recognized a tree line. Then a familiar bend in the slope. We were near the lower trails. I saw footprints, fresh ones from early hikers, and then rooftops. The lodge. I called out before we were even through the trees. "Help! I need help!" A few people turned. Then they ran. I fell to my knees in the snow, still holding Wren. Staff rushed forward. Someone took her from my arms, wrapped her in blankets. Someone else guided me inside. I could barely stand. "It's Ellie Whitaker," I heard someone say. "And one of the missing kids." I was too tired to speak, too cold to explain. Someone brought me tea. Someone else took my gloves off and started cleaning the cuts on my hands. The manager came rushing in out of breath. Miss Whitaker, the gondola operator, said he saw a woman earlier, a child with her. Could have been Rachel. Which way, I asked. Down the mountain. They didn't stop. That was all I needed to know. If Rachel had reached the bottom, she was long gone. Wren was rushed to the hospital. I insisted on going with her. When we got there, a paramedic pulled me aside. "Ma'am," he said, "we'll need to take your statement soon. Rachel Whitaker was already brought in earlier today. She says you tried to harm her and the children." I didn't answer right away. Just looked down at Wren's face as she slept, her tiny hand still wrapped around my finger. I'd spent the night saving that child's life. Now I'd have to prove I hadn't tried to end it. They kept me in the emergency department longer than I wanted. Said it was protocol. Mild concussion lacerations, potential shock. I told them I was fine, but the doctor insisted on observation. I didn't fight it. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't have the strength. And because Wren was still in surgery. Until I knew she was out of that operating room, I wasn't going anywhere anyway. The nurse offered to call someone for me. I said no. There wasn't anyone left to call. Rachel had turned herself in hours before escorted into the hospital by a hunter who'd found her and Ivy near the main entrance. The police took her statement immediately. Claimed she and the girls had survived a tragic accident. Claimed she'd been trying to protect them. That I'd arrived in the cabin unhinged, blaming her for Daniel's death and tried to harm them. That she'd had no choice but to defend herself and flee. That's what they had in writing. Her version. Not mine. I asked one of the officers quietly if I could give a full statement. He nodded, but said they'd wait until I'd been cleared. Another policy. I'd worked alongside enough officers over the years to know when I was being watched and when they were keeping their distance for a reason. One of them stayed in the hallway outside my door. Said it was just precaution, but it didn't feel that way. And still, not one of them looked me in the eye. That's when the quiet started pressing in. The kind that gets under your ribs. You think you're just tired, just recovering. But it's more than that. It's the stillness that comes when the world has already moved on without you. The lodge, the search, the news alerts, 3 weeks of urgency had vanished overnight, replaced with a question I wasn't ready to face. What if they believed her? What if they believed Rachel? The woman who'd abandoned her daughter in the snow, who'd locked me in a cabin filled with gas and walked away without a word. I replayed it all in my head over and over, trying to find the crack. The thing that didn't fit. But it all came back to the same place. Daniel. The last message he'd sent. cutting the hike short. Talk later. And then nothing. Not one more word. No final call. No explanation. I'd told myself at the time it was just the storm, but now I knew Rachel's version of events couldn't be trusted. Still, the gaps were there. Even with everything I'd lived through, I didn't have proof of what had happened to him. And with Rachel already spinning her story, I knew time was slipping away. I asked to see Wren as soon as she came out of surgery. The doctor said the procedure had gone well, a clean break to the tibia pins placed to stabilize the bone. She'd be groggy for a while, but stable. I sat beside her bed as she slept, counted the quiet breaths. Her little fingers were wrapped around the corner of the blanket even in sleep, like she was still bracing for something. When she woke, she reached for me. Didn't ask about her mom. Just said, "You found me," and drifted back off. I stayed with her through the night. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time the hallway went still, I'd catch myself listening. For footsteps, for voices, for something that never came. I asked the nurse if Ivy had been brought in. She nodded. Said she was under the care of a social worker. No one was saying where. Rachel, they said, was being held for evaluation. Separate from both girls. Separate from me. When morning came, I requested to see Ivy. I had to go through 2 administrators and a detective before they agreed. They led me down a different hallway, quiet, carpeted farther from the commotion of the ER. Ivy was in a small room with a window overlooking the parking lot. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her legs swinging, hair still damp from a recent bath. She looked up when I walked in but didn't run to me. Just stared. I sat down across from her. Gave her space. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. Her eyes were wide and uncertain. "Where's Mom?" she asked. "Is Wren okay?" I told her the truth, or most of it. That Wren was sleeping, that the doctors had taken good care of her, that she'd see her soon. I told her mom was safe too, but that some people needed to ask questions. Ivy didn't cry, didn't move, just sat there, her hands in her lap. "Daddy's not coming back," she said, not as a question. "She told us he had an accident." My mouth went dry. I wanted to reach for her, but I didn't. I nodded. "No, sweetheart. He's not coming back. But he loved you. So much. And so do I." That was when she finally moved, crawled into my lap and held on tight. No words. Just weight and warmth and a kind of grief that doesn't belong in children. I stayed with her until the social worker returned. Promised I'd come back as soon as I could. Promised I'd be the one waiting this time. Afterward, I walked back to Wren's room. She was still sleeping. A nurse was changing her IV. Said she'd asked for me earlier. Said she kept murmuring about the cabin, about fire, about cold. I asked if anyone from law enforcement had come to speak with her. The nurse said not yet. Said they were being careful given her age, but that someone would be by soon. I sat in the chair beside her and didn't say a word. Just listened to the soft clicks of the monitor and the hum of the vents. That afternoon, I received a call from the front desk. Someone named Cal Jennings had arrived. Said he needed to speak to me and the police. Said it was urgent. I told them to send him up. Cal walked in with a quiet expression I hadn't seen on him before. He looked older than he had on the trail, more hollow around the eyes. He nodded at the officer in the hallway, then stepped into the room. "There's something I need to say," he told me. "To you. And to the police." I should have said it a long time ago. I didn't speak. I just stood there watching him. Waiting. And that's when everything began to shift. He asked to speak in private, so we followed the officer down the hall to a consultation room. Small, no windows, just a round table and 2 chairs on each side. Another officer joined us and shut the door. Cal didn't sit right away. He stood there for a moment with his hat in his hands, his eyes on the floor. When he did speak, it was quiet, and steady. 3 weeks ago, I found Rachel, Daniel, and the girls already at my cabin. It was the night the first storm hit. I didn't interrupt. I just watched him waiting for the rest. They'd gotten turned around. He went on. Said they weren't planning to go that far in, but the storm came on fast. The kids were cold, scared. I let them stay. I nodded. That part tracked. I'd guessed as much the moment I saw the supplies inside the cabin. Cal swallowed hard. I left the next morning. I figured I'd head down to the lodge, give them space. Rachel said they'd head out when the weather cleared, but halfway back I heard something screaming. I went back. He paused there. One of the officers leaned forward. "Go on," he said. Cal's voice dropped. I saw Rachel push Daniel. It landed in the room like the air had dropped. No one moved. They were near the cliff behind the cabin, he said. He was facing her. They were arguing, not shouting, but serious. The kids were behind a tree, watching. He stepped backward a little, she stepped forward. And then she shoved him. Hard. He went over. I kept my hands flat on the table, but I felt them tense. "Did you go to him?" one of the officers asked. "No," Cal said. The storm was worsening again. The slope was unstable. I was afraid if I got close, I'd fall too. "So you just left?" I asked. He didn't flinch at the question. "No." I confronted her. But Rachel saw me. She didn't panic, not at first. Said it was a misunderstanding. That he slipped. But I saw her hands. The way she backed up right after. It wasn't an accident. Not to me. I asked him why he didn't report it. Right then, his answer came slower this time. She made me an offer. Said if I let her stay hidden, helped her keep the girls safe for a little while, she'd make it worth my time. Told me about the life insurance, $2 million. Said Daniel had been thinking about changing his will, but hadn't finalized anything. He looked at me then. Really looked. I was ashamed. But I said yes. I thought maybe it'd blow over. That maybe she'd, I don't know, turn herself in, or something. The officer sitting beside me wrote something down. "What changed?" he asked. "Why come forward now?" "Because she was going to pin it on me," Cal said flat. "I heard her talking to someone on the phone. A lawyer, maybe. She said she could say I was the one who pushed Daniel, that I got aggressive, that she and the kids had to hide from me. And when I saw her at the base of the mountain with only one child, I knew something was wrong. That's when I made the call." No one said anything for a moment. The second officer stood and quietly left the room, probably to inform the team building the case. Cal looked back at me. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just couldn't live with it anymore. I couldn't live with what I knew." I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say. Not yet. The remaining officer stood. "Mr. Jennings, you're under arrest as an accessory after the fact to homicide. You have the right to remain silent." The words went on, but I barely heard them. I kept thinking about the ring. Daniel's wedding band. The way Rachel had slipped it onto her thumb like it meant nothing. She hadn't dropped it. She'd hidden it, planted it, and I'd missed it until it was too late. As they led Cal out, he turned back once more. "You never would have found Wren without me," he said. "I hope someday you'll remember that." I watched him go. Didn't nod. Didn't speak. I didn't know what I'd remember yet. A few minutes later, the second officer came back. "We're preparing to bring Rachel into custody now," he said. "We'll question the children once they're medically cleared, but we have enough to move forward." I asked where Ivy was. He said she was still in the pediatric unit under observation supervised by a child advocate. Rachel had been kept away from her just as they'd promised. "We'll let you know when it's time," he said, "but we'd like you there when we speak with Rachel." I nodded. I didn't need time to think about it. That evening, just as the sun was disappearing behind the hospital roofs, I returned to Wren's room. She was awake, a little pale, a little groggy, but she was drinking juice, watching a cartoon she wasn't really paying attention to. "Grandma Ellie," she said as I came in, "I had a dream you were still carrying me, but we were on a boat this time." I smiled and sat beside her. "I think I'd carry you just about anywhere," I said. "Even on a boat." She leaned her head on my arm. I stayed with her until the nurse came in to check her vitals. When the monitors were quiet again, I looked down at her and asked softly, "Do you remember what happened after your dad went to find help?" Her face turned toward me slowly. "Mom said he wasn't coming back." She cried a little. Then she said we had to stay quiet and not talk about it. "Did you see what happened?" I asked. Did she ever say why Wren hesitated, then shook her head? She said, "Sometimes daddies don't listen, that we had to be strong." For her. I didn't press her further. Not tonight. But it told me enough. Rachel hadn't just abandoned her child in the snow. She'd tried to bury the truth in their minds before anyone else could find it. I looked out the window. Snow was starting again, just a light dusting this time. But the sky was clear enough to see the stars behind it. Somewhere below that hospital floor, Rachel was sitting behind a locked door. Still thinking she could talk her way out. Still trying to spin the story. But it wouldn't hold. Not anymore. The hospital hallway outside Wren's room had gone still. I sat by her bed with my hand resting lightly on her foot, careful not to disturb the cast. The sun had dropped behind the trees outside, leaving a cold blue glow on the window glass. I kept thinking about what Cal had said about Rachel's hands. Daniel's fall, the silence afterward. It was a kind of truth that didn't come with evidence, just weight. And weight doesn't hold up in court. I'd worked with enough prosecutors to know what they'd say. Eyewitness testimony from a man who admitted to aiding a fugitive wasn't going to be enough. Not against a mother who'd already claimed she was running from me. I looked at Wren, her face soft in sleep, her breath just barely fogging the air. I needed something more. I stepped into the hallway, flagged down the nurse on duty, and asked if I could have the contents of my coat, whatever had been salvaged from the night I came in. She disappeared for a few minutes and came back with a sealed plastic bag. Inside was the knife I'd used to cut myself free, my crushed phone, and a small bundle of damp papers folded in half. I took the bag and returned to the room, sitting by the window this time. I opened the bundle carefully. My notebook was ruined. Pages stuck together. Ink bled through lines. But wedged between two sheets was something I hadn't remembered slipping in a trail permit. Issued 3 weeks earlier with Daniel's name in bold. And behind that, folded twice a receipt. I held it up to the light. Gasoline, lighter fluid, matches, all purchased at a station near the base of the trailhead. The date matched the day before they went missing. And the name on the card wasn't Daniel's. It was Rachel's. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't prove murder. Didn't even prove intent. But it raised a question. Why would she buy accelerants the day before a family trip into the woods? I brought the receipt to the nurse's station and asked if someone from the sheriff's office could take a look. A deputy came by half an hour later. Young quiet. He asked to scan a copy and promised it would be passed along. I asked if Rachel was still being held in the lower wing. He nodded. She's not under arrest yet. Just protective custody while the investigation continues. I asked if she'd said anything. Not much, he said. But she's been asking for a lawyer. I thanked him, handed over the bag, and walked back to the pediatric unit. Ivy was awake when I arrived. She was sitting up this time, coloring with a broken red crayon on the tray table across her lap. She looked up and smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. I asked if I could sit, and she nodded. I waited until she finished her picture. A house, 3 stick figures, 1 smaller one crossed out. "Sweetheart," I said, "can I ask you something about your mom?" She kept coloring, slow and careful. She said not to talk to strangers. "I'm not a stranger, Ivy. I'm your grandma. I've known you since the day you were born." She pressed the crayon a little harder. She said people would twist things, that they'd lie to me, that they'd try to take us away from her. "Is that why you were hiding?" I asked. "Because she told you to?" Ivy shrugged, still focused on her drawing. "She said we had to stay quiet, that if we told the wrong story, something bad would happen." "Did something bad happen already?" Her hand froze. Just for a second. "We saw Daddy fall," she whispered. He was yelling at her, and she looked mad. I think she pushed him, but then she cried and said it was my fault, that if I hadn't been whining about my mittens, he wouldn't have gone out there. I leaned in gently. "It wasn't your fault, Ivy. None of this is your fault." She looked up at me then, and her eyes were brimming. "Do you believe me?" "I do," I said. "I believe you." That night I stayed in the hospital again. I couldn't sleep, so I went down to the small family lounge and sat with a cup of coffee that had gone cold long before I finished it. Around 2 a.m., one of the janitors came in. An older man with kind eyes, said he'd seen me on the news. "You're the one who found the little girl, right?" I nodded. He took a seat nearby and pulled off his gloves. "They don't usually say much on TV, just that it's all under investigation." I didn't respond. He leaned in a little. "I don't mean to be nosy, but I clean the intake rooms. I see what people leave behind. That woman, Rachel. She had a duffel bag with her. Nurses logged it in, but something about it felt off." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The weight," he said. "Didn't feel like clothes or snacks or anything like that. Too dense. Metal, maybe. I only picked it up to move it from the hall to the locker, but something in my gut said she didn't bring it for the kids." I stood. "Where's the locker?" He led me back to the intake area, showed me the small staff-only storage closet where patient belongings were tagged and held. He pointed to a shelf with a red canvas bag. The label read R. Whitaker. "You'll need a staffer to open it," he said. "I'm not authorized." I nodded, thanked him, and made a call to the deputy who'd taken the receipt. He met me there 20 minutes later. When he unzipped the bag, we both stood still. Inside were several items wrapped in towels, a hunting knife, a map with markings all along the ridgeline, a half-burned notebook, and at the bottom, Daniel's wallet still intact. The officer took one look and radioed it in. As we waited for the rest of the team to arrive, I pulled the notebook from the bag. The front page was scorched, but the back was legible. A note written in Daniel's handwriting. Just a few lines, shaky and rushed. "If I don't make it back, ask Ellie. She knows. I never wanted to go on this trip." She insisted. "Something's wrong. Tell the girls I love them." I handed it to the deputy. My hands were shaking. "I think this is enough," I said, "to finally get her off the street." He nodded. "It's more than enough." The wheels were in motion now. Rachel wouldn't be talking her way out of this. The snow hadn't let up in days, but it was different now, fine, steady, silent. Like the whole mountain was holding its breath. The hospital had moved Rachel to a secure holding room in the East Wing while they processed the evidence. She hadn't spoken since the arrest. Not to her court-appointed attorney, not to the officers, not even to the psychologist who'd been called in to evaluate her. I watched her through the glass from the observation side, still upright hands folded neatly in her lap like she was waiting on a train that had already come and gone. There was no fear in her face, just stillness. An officer beside me said the judge had approved the search. They were going back to the ridge this time with dogs' radar and a forensic team. I told them I wanted to go too, not because I expected to find anything on my own, but because I needed to stand there. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The path to the ridge was narrow and steep. Packed snow had turned to a slick crust of ice that cracked under every step. I moved steady behind the lead officer. The site where Cal claimed Daniel had fallen wasn't marked, but I knew the place. I remembered the way the trees curved back toward the slope, the way the wind cut harder there. When we reached it, the dogs started to circle. One stopped near a break in the brush just above a sharp drop. The handler nodded and signaled the others. They brought out the equipment ground-penetrating radar flags markers. I stepped back and watched. The lead officer crouched low and pointed to something near the base of a tree. It looked like a rock at first, dark and misshapen. But then I saw the edge of a boot sole, torn and frayed. Not far beyond that, a piece of dark cloth flannel, maybe. The body hadn't shifted far. Snow had kept it close. They called it in and sealed the perimeter. I moved back toward the cabin while they worked. The structure was still standing, though the front door had been splintered during the search weeks earlier. Inside, it smelled of damp wood and stale smoke. Ivy's drawings were still tacked to the wall by the wood stove, faded, curling at the corners. I looked around the main room and then climbed the narrow stairs to the loft. 2 sleeping bags, one ripped. A pillow with a child's name stitched across the case wren. On the small table below the loft, I saw something I hadn't noticed during the rescue, a small leather-bound book half hidden beneath a coil of twine. I picked it up. It wasn't Rachel's. It was Daniel's. His handwriting was neat tight. Pages filled edge to edge. At first, the entries were simple weather supplies, what the kids had eaten. But after 3 pages, his tone shifted. He started writing about Rachel, about her behavior. He wrote that she'd been leaving the cabin at night without explanation, sometimes for hours. That she wouldn't let him or the girls touch the food she kept in the far cupboard. That Wren had woken up with bruises she didn't remember getting. He wrote, "I'm not sure who I married anymore." He wrote, "If something happens to me, it won't be the storm's fault." I stopped reading. The wind outside had picked up sharp and fast through the trees. I heard one of the officers call for me. I came back down, the notebook tucked under my coat. He told me they'd found more ashes behind the cabin, charred fragments of what looked like documents, metal clasps from a binder. Paper melted into itself. They'd send it to the lab, but the officer said it was probably a financial ledger. Maybe insurance papers, maybe Daniel's will. Whatever it was, she'd tried to erase it. Back at the hospital, I turned in the journal. It would be cataloged with the other evidence. I went to check on Wren and Ivy before they were transferred into state care. Ivy had drawn a new picture. This time it was of a woman standing between 2 girls, arms out. "That's you," she said. "You're holding us so we don't fall." I nodded, smiled, and told her I'd be close by always. I left just before dark. On my way out of the hospital parking lot, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. A woman's voice came through, raspy low. "Is this Ellie Whitaker?" I said yes. "My name's Dana. I'm Daniel's sister. I live in Nevada. I just saw the news." She paused like she was trying to figure out how much I already knew. "Rachel used to call me," she said, "after the girls were born. We didn't talk much, but a few years ago Daniel called in the middle of the night. Said he was scared. Said she'd been hiding money. That she'd mentioned taking the girls somewhere remote. That if anything happened to him, I needed to call you." I pulled over to the side of the road. "Do you remember when he called?" I asked. "Not exactly. Maybe 2 years ago, around Thanksgiving. He said she'd been watching him, checking the mileage on his truck, asking weird questions about the cabin. I told him to leave, but he said he couldn't, that he was documenting everything, that you were the only one who believed him." I closed my eyes. "Thank you," I said. "That helps more than you know." After we hung up, I sat in the car until my hands stopped shaking. I looked out at the woods just beyond the road, at the thin line of trees that stretched toward the mountain. The ridge was quiet again, now sealed off and hidden under layers of snow, but I could still feel it, like the weight of something unfinished pressing just beneath the surface. Tomorrow, they'd begin questioning Rachel officially. There'd be recordings, transcripts, maybe even a confession. But none of it would bring Daniel back. None of it would undo what she'd already taken from those girls. Still, it had to begin somewhere. And this was the start. The confession came just after dawn. Rachel had been silent through 2 interviews, barely acknowledging the detective's questions, staring past them like she was somewhere else entirely. But on the 3rd morning, she asked for tea just once, and then sat down at the table in the interview room without needing to be prompted. She folded her hands in front of her, took a long breath, and said, "It wasn't supposed to go that way." The officer on duty pressed record. Rachel didn't cry. She didn't explain it like she was trying to gain sympathy. It was more like she was reporting something that had already happened to someone else. She said Daniel had planned to leave her and that he'd been siphoning money from their accounts to do it. She'd confronted him 2 days before the trip, found a burner phone hidden in the garage and a list of flight numbers. He denied everything, of course, said the money was for Wren's surgery, that the phone was for emergencies. But she didn't believe him. She said he was going to take the girls, that he'd been manipulating her, turning them against her behind her back. "I wasn't going to let him do it," she said. "Not again. Not after everything I gave up." When they asked what she meant by again, she went quiet. Then she said Daniel had a son from a previous relationship, one he hadn't told her about until their 1st year of marriage. The boy had died in a car accident on Daniel's watch. After that, she said he changed, became paranoid, overprotective, obsessed with safety. And when Wren's diagnosis came, it pushed him over the edge. He wanted to bubble wrap the girls, she said. He thought I was careless, that I didn't love them right. She said the trip to the ridge had been his idea, but the way she told it, she went along to keep the peace. Then she shifted, said that once they were up there, something snapped. Daniel had accused her of poisoning the kids against him, said she was hiding pills in their food. They argued loud, bitter. The girls were asleep, or at least she thought they were. At some point, he walked out into the snow. She followed him, still yelling. He turned. She pushed. "I didn't mean for him to fall," she said, "but I didn't try to stop it either." She said she waited at the edge of the ridge until the wind carried his voice away. Then she went back inside, locked the door, and didn't speak of it again. She told the girls he went to get help, said he'd be back in the morning, and when morning came and he didn't return, she told them he was lost, and they had to stay put. The notebook in her bag. Daniel's handwriting. His message, she claimed not to have read it. He must have left it before she said. I didn't see it until later. The map, the lighter fluid, the knife. She said those were for protection, that she feared what might be in the woods. She never expected the snow to hold them in, or for the girls to start getting sick. She tried to make it sound like a terrible series of accidents, like fear had driven her to make poor choices. But when they played back Ivy's statement, her quiet voice talking about bruises and threats about hiding under a blanket while her mom screamed, Rachel just went silent. She leaned back in the chair, looked straight into the lens and said, "They were mine. He tried to take them from me. That's not what a father does." The interview ended there. The footage was sealed and processed for the prosecutor. I was in the hallway when they brought her back to her cell. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and just didn't care. Her expression never changed. I didn't speak. I couldn't. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, I went through Daniel's journal again, slowly this time. The final pages were darker. Scattered thoughts, warnings. "If she takes the girls before I can stop her, I've failed," he wrote. "I don't think she knows who she is anymore. Some nights I wake up and she's watching me, just watching." He mentioned a name, Micah, said he was the only person Rachel trusted outside of him, a cousin maybe, or someone she'd grown up with. I didn't know the name, but it felt important. I wrote it down, circled it, and folded the page into my coat pocket. The next morning, I got a call from the DA. They were preparing formal charges, second-degree murder, felony, child endangerment, obstruction. The case was strong now, they said, and they had enough to hold her without bail. "We'll keep the girls in protective placement until your guardianship clears," the caseworker told me. But it's moving fast. Faster than usual. I asked if they needed me at the arraignment. "No," she said. "You've done enough." But it didn't feel finished. Not yet. That name, Micah, it kept circling back in my mind. I started making calls, first to Daniel's sister in Nevada, then to a few old neighbors back in Cedar Ridge where Rachel grew up. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I knew one thing for sure: there was still more to the story. I found Micah at a mobile mechanic lot just outside Missoula. The place didn't have a sign, just a rusted-out camper, a few stripped cars, and a folding table where he was rebuilding what looked like a carburetor with a handheld torch. His hair was long pulled back with a piece of twine, and his hands were cracked with grease. I introduced myself, told him I was Daniel Whitaker's mother. At first he didn't react, just wiped his hands with a shop rag and looked off toward the trees. Then he said, "You came to ask about Rachel." I nodded. He leaned against the camper and said, "Thought someone might eventually. I didn't tell him she was in custody. I just said the girls were safe and Daniel wasn't coming back." That got a flicker out of him. He didn't ask how, didn't seem surprised, just stared at the table and muttered, "I always knew it'd end like this, just didn't know who'd be left standing." I waited, let the silence settle. That's when he told me. Rachel had been sent to live with his family when she was 9. Her father was gone, her mother barely present. No one checked on her much, no one asked questions. He said she used to run off into the woods for hours. Once disappeared overnight and came back the next morning with scratches down her legs and a story about a man in the trees. Nobody believed her. After that, she stopped talking much. Just followed orders, got good grades, didn't cause trouble. But he said something about her was always off, like she was performing normal, not living it. When she met Daniel, she saw a way out, a life with rules, a man who'd take care of everything. He gave her what she'd always wanted: order, control, safety. But when that started slipping, when Ren got sick, when the finances strained, Micah said Rachel turned cold. She didn't know how to cope with losing control. She saw threats everywhere. And when she got scared, she didn't ask for help. She shut people out. Or worse. Daniel thought he could fix her, Micah said. "But you can't fix someone who won't admit they're broken." He paused, then added, "And you sure as hell can't love the danger out of him." I asked if he knew about the cabin. He shook his head. Said Rachel never brought him near the girls after they turned 5. "She didn't want my kind of people around them," he said. "Told me once she was raising them to be clean. Whatever that means." I asked if he'd testify. He said he'd think about it. That's all I could get. But it was enough. I left there feeling heavier but clearer. That week the arraignment went forward. The courtroom was small, quiet. Rachel stood in a beige jumpsuit, hands at her sides, expression flat. She entered a plea of not guilty. No emotion, no glance in my direction. The prosecutor laid out the charges: murder, endangerment, interference with custody. The judge denied bail. Afterward, I met with the DA privately. I gave her Micah's name, passed on everything I'd learned. She nodded slowly, said it tracked with what they'd gathered but would need corroboration. I asked what kind of sentence Rachel was facing. If the jury believes the confession, she said, 30 to life. That night I sat on the edge of Ivy's bed while she slept. Ren was curled up beside her, both of them tangled in the same blanket. I listened to them breathe soft and steady like wind through pine needles. The girls were starting to talk more. Ivy had drawn a picture in crayon, just mountains, and a sun. No people, but it was a beginning. Wren had stopped flinching every time a door closed too hard. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was movement. CPS scheduled a final home visit the following week. My cabin had passed every inspection, but the caseworker wanted one last look. She said it was routine. I cleaned the windows, replaced the batteries in the smoke detectors, set out fresh clothes in the girls' drawers. But I also did something else. I opened the old footlocker where I kept Daniel's journals, took out the one from that final trip. I wrapped it in cloth and locked it away again. Not for the court, not for the headlines, just for them one day. So they'd know their father tried, that he didn't just vanish, that someone remembered every word he wrote. Later that week, a ranger friend called me, said they'd finished the cadaver dog search of the ridge and found bones fractured old but definitely human near the edge of the drop. Dental confirmed what we already knew. Daniel was finally officially gone. I let the girls sleep through the night before I told them. Ivy nodded slowly. Wren just looked at me and said, "Okay." No tears. Not yet. But something in the air shifted, like the waiting part was over. We scattered Daniel's ashes in the basin the following Sunday. Just me, the girls, and the wind. They each took turns tossing a handful into the air. Ivy whispered something. I didn't ask what. I just stood beside them until the light dipped low and the shadows stretched across the ridge. That evening, as I rinsed the ash off my hands, I noticed a voicemail from the prosecutor. Her voice was quiet. "There's something you need to hear," she said. "It's about Rachel's last statement." The voicemail was short. The prosecutor's voice was low, like she didn't want to say the words out loud. Rachel had given a second statement. One she hadn't shared in court. Just a quiet addition she'd asked to be recorded and sealed. In it, she described the final night in the cabin. Said she didn't mean to hurt Daniel. Claimed it was an accident, an argument near the ridge, a shove he slipped. She kept saying that. He slipped. Over and over. But there was something else. She said the girls wouldn't remember. I made sure she whispered. They won't remember any of it. I don't know what she meant, and I'm not sure I want to. The DA offered to play the full tape for me. I declined. I'd already lived the ending. I didn't need to hear her voice trying to soften what she'd done. Rachel pled out. 27 years. Eligible for parole in 15. She'll serve her time in a women's facility north of the state line. I was told I could give a statement at her sentencing. I chose not to. Some silences don't need filling. The girls started school that fall. Ivy's in 3rd grade, Wren's in 1st. Different teachers, same bus stop. I pack their lunches, braid their hair, and every morning I watch them walk down the gravel drive with their backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. They're learning how to be ordinary kids. They sleep through the night now, laugh at cartoons, complain about vegetables. They still wake up holding hands sometimes, still check the locks before bed. But they're healing in ways I never thought possible. People ask me how I managed, how I stayed calm through it all. I never know what to say, because the truth is, I didn't. I broke down in quiet corners. I screamed into towels. I sat on the porch at 2 a.m, listening for footsteps that weren't there. What kept me going wasn't strength. It was something smaller than that, something quieter. The belief that even the darkest stories deserve to be followed all the way through. Daniel wasn't perfect, but he tried to protect his girls. He kept records left, clues, risked everything to find them. And in the end, he did. He found them. That matters. That means something. I keep one of his trail maps framed in the hallway, the one with the hand-drawn markings. Ivy asked me once what it was. I told her, "That's the path your daddy took to find you." She looked at it for a long time and said, "Then we should never take it down. We haven't. Sometimes I still walk the ridge where they found him, Just me and the dogs, boots crunching in the pine needles' cold wind off the basin. I don't go looking for signs anymore. I just walk, breathe, remember. The forest has a way of holding its stories close, like it's still watching, still listening. And maybe it is. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no one gets forgotten, and the quiet voices still have a place to be heard.